So my name is Pieter Wільямс. I'm from Australia. I grew up in a very small town there, only 25,000 people. And I always say I grew up on a BMX bike and a skateboard, which is true. They were my passions, and they still remain to be, and a lot of other things as well. But I went to university in Sydney, and then I worked there for a number of years. And exactly 25 years ago, by then girlfriends, were married by then, worked in London, and that was our European kind of adventure, to travel as much as possible whenever there was a long weekend, either around United Kingdom or to Paris or Amsterdam or Barcelona, etc. And then at the end of that 6 months of work, we did about 2 months of traveling around Europe. So we didn't get to Ukraine, but we did get to Prague and Berlin and all the way down to Istanbul and across to Athens, and we did a couple of loops of Europe. So one day I hope to visit your country when things are back to normal, and I hope that's sooner than later, of course. And I hope you're all coping as best as you can, that all your family are safe. A lot of empathy for what you're going through. So let's see if we can give you some new ideas that you can put into practice in person, but also virtually through platforms such as LinkedIn. I know Annie spoke to you a while ago, Annie Filipova. She's actually a former colleague of mine. We used to work in Hong Kong together. So after returning from Europe, that 25 years ago, we ended up moving to Singapore from 2001 to 2010. And we had a 3-year-old daughter when we first moved here. And we thought we were coming for 2 years, but it ended up becoming 9 years. And I did some more study, my wife did some more study, and we ended up leaving in 2010 after I finished my MBA from the University of Chicago. And we had 4 children by then. And we left to Hong Kong, and we were there for 12 years. And that's where I started playing with some of the ideas I learned at business school. So I'll jump across. I'm not sure if this is easy to read, but it basically says innovation and adventure, which to me are very closely linked. Whether you're a company or a person, you can integrate the two concepts, and I'll explain more as we go along. So this is my MBA class where we graduated in Singapore. They actually had an executive MBA from the University of Chicago. So they had a class in Singapore, they had a class in London, and they had a class in Chicago. And this was actually at the Chicago campus. And this is the 90 people that traveled in from around Asia. Some even came in from Africa, India, Korea, Japan, etc. And that was an adventure, like just getting exposed to a lot of different people working in different industries and from different countries. And that's a recurring theme. I love meeting new people. I love hearing their story and learning sort of the projects that they're working on, what their passions are. And, more often than not, we discover that we've got shared interests, and those shared interests can become, a platform for collaboration, because if we both, enjoy or care about a particular topic, then it's an easy next step to try and build on that in some way. And that's become sort of one of my core ideas that I've played with over the last 10, 12 years that we were living in Hong Kong. We actually relocated back to Singapore in June, so only 4 or 5 months ago. And the reason for that was because Hong Kong was just becoming quite difficult, because there's very strict rules around COVID, and travel was very difficult. 3 of our 4 children are actually based in Australia. And my wife hadn't seen our oldest daughter for 3 years. She hadn't seen her parents for 3 years. So, being away from family is not fun, and I know you all appreciate that as much as anyone. So the core idea that I kind of got out of the Chicago Booth program was that whether you're a corporate or an individual, the more that you build bridges between diverse industries, between diverse locations, mindsets, age groups, diversity and inclusion obviously is a common theme right now, but to me, this model, this framework that I'm going to explain, makes it practical and actionable, explains the logic for why we want to have this diversity and inclusion. So just picture a company that, like I work in a bank, imagine there's two banks. One of the banks stays very isolated and they just think about things internally and they, think about strategy and so on. The other bank deliberately stays connected to emerging technologies, different industries, different locations, and stays alert to what's happening in the real world. If they were the only facts that you had of two different banks, and you ask yourself, okay, which one would you invest in? I think it becomes fairly clear that you would invest in the one that's more open to connecting and staying, as close to what's going on in the real world as possible, because they're the ones that are going to get early access to new ideas, new business models, new technology, and they'll eventually become more innovative over time. It's very unlikely that at someone or any firm that isolates themselves is going to come up with all the potential ideas that are out there. It's just kind of impossible. So this idea of putting your business at risk of productive accident. So the professor that we had for strategic leadership, he went back 100 years and he looked at how does innovation happen? And he looked at people like Henry Ford, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, everyone in between, from people that were doing innovative, creative things. And he tried to look at what were the common ingredients or common denominators across these people. And a lot of it boiled down to the diversity of their network, the range of their interests, how curious they were. And they didn't really invent anything. They basically borrowed ideas from other industries and repackaged them in different ways. So something that's routine in your life or your situation, your industry, your companies, could be revolutionary to me, because something that you take for granted could be a new idea that I could twist and manipulate in a way that it becomes useful in a different setting. And if you go back and look at how a lot of innovation happens, that's exactly kind of the framework, and you see that with a lot of startups. They say, well, if Uber was an idea that you could transfer, you hear a lot of startups saying, well, we're the Uber of looking after dogs, or we're the Uber of haircuts, or it doesn't matter what it is, but something on call using technology becomes a recurring theme. But you can think about that with Apple, like Apple computers. When Steve Jobs went to an R&D lab, I think it was with Xerox, and they had a device in their lab that if you wiggled it on the desktop, it made the cursor move on the screen. And they didn't know what to do with that, but Steve Jobs was the one that had the insight that said, okay, this would be really cool in my garage because I can integrate it into their new computers, and you can click on icons to activate programs rather than typing code, which basically means children can do it. You don't have to learn some new language to operate a computer. So he got that insight and he turned it into something that was, useful for, their consumers or their clients and customers. And even when Steve Jobs dropped out of university, he remained curious enough to drop in or attend classes on calligraphy. And you think, well, what does calligraphy have to do with, computers? But it became his inspiration for developing a wide range of type fonts. And, having that flexibility and that variety appealed to a lot of creative people, designers, and it became a competitive advantage. And so you can get inspired by lots of different industries in lots of different ways. They're one of my favorite examples of very quite low-tech sort of innovations. McDonald's were sponsoring a train departure board somewhere in Europe. I'm not sure exactly which city, but all they did was associate the time, one of those train boards that flicks, like 5 minutes going from London to Waterloo or something, or 30 minutes going to London to Oxford. And all they did was associate the amount of time with a product. So if it's 5 minutes, they put up a little image of a cup of coffee. You've got time for a cup of coffee. And if it was 30 minutes, they would show a cup of coffee and a muffin. And if it was an hour, it would show a hamburger and chips and, Coke. And just that idea, associating the product with the amount of time and just putting a drawing of a hand that says, McDonald's is 50 meters this way. And they increased the number of customers by 5,000 just in 1 month. just by planting the seed. So you think about, okay, how could that be useful to other industries? And, you know, in the banking environment, instead of getting on a plane, on a train, what if you're at the airport and you've got 2 hours before you're about to fly? Maybe your financial consultant could give you a call or a Zoom call or meet you in person to talk about your retirement savings or your insurance or your investments and things like that. So, you know, finding a trigger for serving your customers can be inspired by some other unrelated example, McDonald's, but it could turn into something that's useful for other industries. So then jumping to the next page, the kind of the equivalent sort of diagram that I use for putting yourself as an individual at risk of productive accident. So you're putting yourself in this situation. You're kind of getting outside your comfort zone a little bit. You're at risk of something interesting happening. So there's no guarantees. But productive accident, you can think of serendipity or happenstance or some useful outcome, magic, whatever you want to call it. And this is the phrase that the professor used at the end of his subject to us. And he could have just, you know, finished with the teaching that he was doing for us and just set an exam. But he boiled all of his research down to a single phrase, which is the one that I've written at the bottom here. Put yourself at risk of productive accident. The fact that we're having this Zoom call today is an example of that. You know, you're joining a call with some Australian guy based in Singapore, and something interesting might happen. You're not sure what, but, you know, if you pay attention, you know, something might resonate with you that sets you off in a new direction. You know, something I say or I recommend, or if we connect, you know, on LinkedIn, which I highly recommend that we should all connect. And, you know, something I share might be useful for you, you know, today or in the future. And some of these things that you learn from each other, they kind of, you know, you're not sure where they might pop up, but sometimes, you know, if someone mentions something that you think, oh, I don't have any connection to that idea, suddenly you'll start seeing that same topic in the newspaper or, you know, online through some other format. And then you've got an opportunity to share that back to that person. Say, hey, you mentioned this, and look what I just found. You might be interested in following up on that. And what I ended up doing after moving to Hong Kong, after graduating from this MBA program, I basically used this sentence as my filter for a lot of decisions. If someone said, you know, do you want to speak at an event that's got nothing to do with your day job? Maybe before I heard of this concept, I might have said no. But now I really appreciate the idea of speaking at an event to people that, you know, are in different situations from different industries, because we're more likely to learn something from each other because we've lived different lives, we've had different experiences. And I always get something valuable from that, and hopefully vice versa as well. So what I've sort of realized is, from a corporate point of view, putting themselves at risk of these productive accidents helps them with innovation. From a personal point of view, the more I do this, I follow this as an idea, it turns my life into an adventure. And so when I moved to Hong Kong, a lot of things started to happen that, yeah, I mean, so many that I ended up having to write a book, because we probably need 5 hours to talk about all of these little projects or little adventures that kind of emerge. But, you know, in the end, I thought, okay, let me write this down, because, you know, first of all, so it's a record. And secondly, I just wanted to build on itself. So I want people to read the book and say, oh, this reminds me of something else. And then that person might share that with me, and then I'll learn something new, and it will expand this sort of range of material. So one of the ways that I put myself at risk of these sort of productive accidents was to attend a lot of events. And I found communities of sort of like-minded people. So here are some of the ones that I attended when I was, you know, when I moved to Hong Kong. TEDx was a big event there. They had about 10 different platforms. Then there was a lot of startup activity. So Hong Kong startups, General Assembly, I think about as night school for startups. It was out of New York that came to different cities around the world. Paperclip was a co-working space. The Chambers of Commerce, even the schools that our children were attending, because they were going to different schools, by definition, we got to meet parents from different, you know, environments, and it increased the probability of meeting people that, could turn into collaborators on different things. Creative Mornings is one of my favorite communities that I discovered. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it's in about 200 cities worldwide. They distribute one word per month to all those cities, and the local host will find someone that can speak on that topic. And so the word might be wonder, or it might be justice, or it might be broken, or invest. So for instance, at the beginning of 2020, just before COVID sort of really messed things up, I spoke on the word invest, but I didn't talk about, from a financial point of view. I spoke about it from, what do you do with your time? Do you watch TV all day or all night? Or do you invest your time, energy, your attention into building something? Could be a product, could be writing a book, could be learning an instrument. Any new skill, I think, is a better use of your time than, binge watching a TV series potentially. I also discovered Peka Kucha, if you can read it down the bottom in the middle there, or Pakacha. And it's a sort of a presentation format where it's very visual. So you notice a lot of my slides are going to be photos. And Peka Kucha is you get 20 images and they auto-rotate every 20 seconds. So you tell a story and you're not in control of the slides. They auto-rotate, so you have to keep the connection moving. So it's one of my favorite presentation formats. And I've done one of those as well on connection and collaboration, which is a recurring theme. The School of Life is out of London. And again, that's a great resource. I think I would highly recommend checking out their website and their YouTube channel as well. And along the way, I met people that were doing interesting things. So I attended a Chamber of Commerce event where I met a gentleman who, just from one conversation, turned into a business meeting on the Wednesday, attending their corporate drinks the following Thursday, and a game of golf on the Friday. And, I guess the main message from that was the room had 100 people, but I'm definitely an introvert. I would rather meet one person at a big event and have a proper conversation than go around, trying to meet 100 people. I don't think that's a great use of time, because you do see that people handing out business cards and it's like spam. It's like, well, I don't know who you are. I don't know why I'm interested in you. So that's a waste. But if you spend the time to get to know one person, then, I'm quite convinced that half an hour is enough time to form a lifelong friendship. And so at the Thursday evening drinks, I met this gentleman on the motorbike here who was having sort of, I guess, a midlife crisis. He decided to stop work for a year and to ride his motorbike from Hong Kong to Australia. And obviously there's some boats involved, but he got to do that. And along the way, he stopped at 10 local charities across Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia. And he took a film crew and he recorded a 30-minute documentary at each location. And that became a TV series that was on some of the airlines. And he raised money for some of those charities. And so I thought that was an interesting person to get to know, and we're still connected. That was just one example. Then at his send-off event, actually, he had a bunch of bands where a lot of the musicians were from the finance industry, which is where he was working before. And there was a gentleman there wearing a T-shirt that when the music played, there were lights on his T-shirt, like a graphic equalizer that was moving, reacting to the music. And I just went up to him and started talking to him, and out of curiosity about the T-shirt. And it turned out he ran a kind of like a underground newsletter saying interesting things that were happening in the city. And I subscribed to that newsletter, and that's where I discovered the guy here wearing the tie. He was a shipping lawyer that had stumbled across a scrapyard for used taxis. Taxis were going to be crushed and turned into scrap metal or something. And he said, look, what are you going to do with all this raw material, like the upholstery from the seats? And they said, well, nothing, He said, well, okay, how much is it if I buy it off you? And they said, oh, you can have it for free. And he didn't know what he was going to do with it at the time. But eventually he and a designer friend turned it into a series of laptop bags and iPad covers. And what was interesting was, he could have just made generic recycled products. But in Hong Kong, they have 3 different colors of taxis, and they drive in different parts of the city. Some drive on the island, some drive in Kowloon, another set drive on a different island called Lantau. And the red ones are on the island, the green ones are in, I think, Kowloon, and the green one and the blue ones are in Lantau. And so he put red lining and red stitching in some of the products, and green in others, and blue in the other. And so to me, it seemed like the perfect souvenir for Hong Kong. We'd ridden in a lot of these taxis. We lived on the island. So I got the one with the red lining and the red stitching. And later, he developed some other products, such as watches with, the same theme, red, blue, green. And I found a shop that had the blue and the green, but they didn't have the red. And I said, well, how do I find out if there's a red one? And they said, go on the website and, and see if it's there. And I ended up sending them an email or sending them a message from the website saying, hey, do you have any red watches? And the guy came back, and it was Billy Potts, the guy in the tie here. And he said, I only made 100. Let me check the warehouse. And a couple of days later, he came back and said, yep, I found the last one. And eventually we decided that we would meet at a bar for him to hand it over, and I could purchase it and so on. And I got to know Billy through that and became a good friend with him. And I ended up getting him to speak at TEDx in Hong Kong, because I ended up curating some of those talks and MC for some of them. And I've also introduced him to Creative Mornings, and he's done some amazing projects subsequent to that. In fact, one of the best things he did on his website was he just put a message at the bottom saying, contact me for anything. And so people started reaching out and saying, hey, you're good at design. Can you please help us do our branding for our company? And so he was working with a sort of a boutique hotel. He was helping a tailor, like a clothing tailor, to do their rebranding. He was working with a car park, like there was a family in Hong Kong that owned a car park in Sydney, and very obscure things, even a gymnasium. And the gym had a funny name. It was called Look Good Naked, kind of, I guess that's why people go to the gym. And, he was doing the branding for those types of things. Anyway, he became a good friend. And that's, when you think back, okay, how did I get to know about him? It was because I had the conversation with the guy with the t-shirts that had the lights on them. And how did I know about him? It was because I went to that event where the guy was riding his motorbike to Australia. And how did I go to that? So I like sort of reflecting on how I met people and then what happened. Because if you can understand how ideas emerge, then you can reproduce that in the future. You say yes to going to these unusual events and pay attention, and good things keep on happening. Eventually, because I got quite connected to the TEDx community, they ended up having about 10 platforms in Hong Kong: TEDx Women, TEDx Youth, TEDx Education. And they were looking for people to do a talk for TEDx Youth. And I thought, oh yeah, my daughter has some interesting friends, maybe they could do it. And then it sort of clicked. I said, well, actually, why, my daughter should do it. She's quite a good drummer and she's into poetry, so she was eventually invited to do a TEDx talk for TEDx Youth. I also helped curate a number of the speakers. So, they had 15 speakers for one of the TEDx events, and I got to know each of them quite well. And 5 of them became lifelong friends. One guy who was in town he grew up in California, but his grandparents were in Hong Kong. He was invited to do a talk. And what was great about his name is Patrick Ip, IP is his surname. And he had created a global dinner series where the whole idea is to have 2 hosts, and each host would invite 5 of their most interesting friends. And, they come together to talk about how do they solve the world problems was the first theme for the very first dinner. But eventually it evolved into 3 questions. What is your story? Not what do you do? Is because, that's irrelevant. I'd rather know, you know, a person's story, where they were from and what they did and so on. And then the next question is, what projects are you working on? And it could be a startup, it could be writing a book, it could be, you know, running an NGO. And the third question, which is kind of where the magic happens, was, okay, you've told me what you care about. What would take that to the next level, and how can we help? So it's a group of people that are prepared to help other people without expecting anything in return. And he called it baller dinners, B-A-L-L-E-R. And if you Google that, it will come up. And there's now about 1,700 people of these, you know, around the world. And, you know, it's all for free. It's just voluntary. But some people won't be interested in joining something like that because, you know, they're not interested in helping people unless they get something out of it. But, you know, when you do find people that are happy to be go-givers instead of go-getters, then some interesting things start to happen. So I've hosted about 20 of these dinners in Hong Kong. When I've gone to New York, I'll say, look, I'm there Monday to Friday, and I have Thursday night free. And before I know it, someone will jump on to this Facebook group and they'll say, yeah, I've booked a restaurant. 10 people I don't know will converge and we'll have a great dinner, and we'll follow the same format. What is your story? What projects are you working on? How can I help? The bottom left picture here where it says happy, that's a documentary filmmaker that I met through TEDx, and he had couch surfed around the world for 3 years making a documentary about happiness. And long story short, he ended up staying with our family for a week or so, and every year he tries to come back and stay with us. And that's been an amazing experience because our children have had this living library of interesting people coming and staying with us, and we've created that as a tradition. Instead of coming to Singapore and staying in a hotel, why don't you come here and stay with us? You know, we have a spare room, or we can reorganize where the children sleep. And it's better for everyone to have that extra time together because, you know, and what I ended up discovering is that, you know, our children have had this, you know, literally this living library of really interesting people coming through. And, you know, that changes their perspective of what, you know, of the world and why there's no such thing as a stranger. It's just, you know, people that you haven't become friends with yet. You know, if you pay attention to good people, there's a lot of good people out there. The other big driver of what I have been doing, you know, for at least 15 years is just to be a serial volunteer. Whenever there's an opportunity to volunteer for something, I generally do, particularly for causes that I care about. And the first one that I discovered was through an Australian woman who had gone to Tanzania in Africa after high school, after graduating when she was about 19, and she was volunteering for a bunch of orphanages. And then she went back to Australia and she studied. And then she said, you know, I could have a normal career here, or I could go back to Africa and try and make a big difference. And someone donated some land and they raised some money in Australia, and they built a small school in Tanzania near Arusha, not far from Mount Kilimanjaro. And her goal with the school was to fight poverty through education, because she only selected the poorest students from around that region. She gets 3,000 students to show up for 20 positions each year. And eventually someone helped write her book. So the book starts in 2002 when she started the school. I was reading the book in about 2008. And by then they'd gone from 3 students to 800 students. And fast forward to today, they have 1,800 students, and they're helping them to lift the child and their families out of poverty. And I ended up volunteering for them because they didn't have any marketing budget at all. And I thought, well, I've got quite a good network. I'll try and tell your story and try and promote what you're doing. And they actually ended up coming and staying with us. And we hosted some events. I invited them to, you know, while they were going back to Australia to give a speaking tour. And I said, well, why don't you come and stay with us? And I'll try and organize a few speaking events for you. And that's happened on a number of occasions in Singapore and then subsequently Hong Kong. In fact, the top left picture here, you can see the Maasai tribal gentleman from Tanzania. The lady holding the clarinet is someone that I helped prepare for her TEDx talk. And she created a series of music concerts called Concerts for Cause as part of her way of overcoming perfectionism. You know, her talk is about overcoming perfectionism, and she rediscovered her enjoyment of music when she started helping charities. And if you go across to the picture on the right, where it's actually Carnegie Hall in New York, when the musician on the left relocated to New York, through a long series of these productive accidents that I often talk about, I ended up going on the board of a charity in New York called Music for Life International. And they put on concerts for humanitarian causes, such as, Doctors Without Borders or the United Nations. We did one in 2015 for their efforts to end violence against women and girls. And, like Ukraine could be a humanitarian cause. Syrian refugees was one, Rohingya refugees. So, I'm not a classical musician, but I definitely appreciate the skill and the effort of 100-piece orchestra and the causes that were that they promote. Eventually, I was able to travel to Tanzania to visit some of the students that we sponsored, and even my Chicago booth at MBA class sponsored two students. I got to meet the students. I got to climb Kilimanjaro, and again, you're sort of mixing the purpose of trying to help people and also creating an adventure for yourself as well. I eventually brought the founder of Music for Life from New York to speak at an event, at a TEDx event in Hong Kong. And a month later, he wrote to me and said that the woman that prepared him for his talk, kind of like what I was doing for other speakers earlier, was thinking about starting a new NGO, and that's called Resolve. And that's why I'm wearing this t-shirt here. And long story short, I ended up going on the board of Resolve because I could tell that they were creating the conditions for these productive accidents. They were bringing 20 young community leaders together, and some of them were refugees, asylum seekers, ethnic minorities, giving them a leadership program that would help them amplify their impact. And so I wanted to help with that. And so I've been on the board of Resolve for the last 5 years. And so, just by realizing that I have a good network and that I can, maybe connect people to raise awareness for what they're doing, I've learned a lot from being on the board of these NGOs. We also had a friend that made, excuse me, made a documentary about domestic workers from the Philippines and Indonesia that are working in Hong Kong and Singapore. And we've had a woman working with us for 17 years looking after our children. So I thought, well, this is a great way to show appreciation for her sacrifice, to amplify, appreciation for what they're doing. In fact, our helper, tragically, she's back in the Philippines. She went just a couple of nights ago. Her husband became ill, and within 24 hours, they had to revive him twice, and the third time they were unsuccessful. So he literally passed away just a few days ago. So she's rushed back to the Philippines to be with her family. And this is after she lost both parents to COVID a year earlier. So she's gone through a lot. So we're trying to support her in every way we can. So, raising the money to make this documentary for the Helper documentary was a great project and something that felt like the right thing to do. Then I discovered a guy who went from Australia to Afghanistan he carried a few skateboards. I think his girlfriend was working for United Nations. And then the street children started picking up the skateboards and say, hey, can you please teach us how to do this? And fast forward, this is about 15 years ago. He's now created skate schools in Afghanistan, South Africa, Cambodia. And they made a documentary, like learning to skateboard in a war zone if you're a girl. And they won an Academy Award for that. And I know, I guess Ukraine is another example. Like, I don't know if you want to learn how to skateboard, but unfortunately, humanity is a little bit silly, and these war zones do continue popping up. But he's an inspirational guy, and I've been working with this guy, Ollie. He actually called me on WhatsApp just this week, saying that they're struggling to raise money for their projects because some of the governments pulled out because Afghanistan changed government. Some of the governments said, okay, we no longer want to support what you're doing there because it might go to terrorists or something like that. So, even though you've got a great project, sometimes, the funding can be a real challenge. But skateboarding continues to be a theme. This photo was taken last Sunday. So me on one side and my other business school friend on the other, and our coaches in the middle. We're trying to learn 5 new skateboarding skills by the end of November to raise money for Resolve, because it's their 5th birthday. So they can amplify the impact of what they're doing. I ended up meeting a lot of cool people, and I'd bring them in to talk at events at work. So that's what this photo is about. I met a really inspirational guy from Canada that was doing kindness walks, where he's found areas in Hong Kong that had a lot of homeless people, and he would get volunteers to distribute boiled eggs and fresh water to people. And along the way, he's helped learn the stories of people that were homeless and lift about 200 or 300 people out of homelessness. And so he's a really inspirational guy. He's a guy in the baseball cap at the back there. Apart from volunteering and going to events, I play a lot of sports and try to make travel part of that. Like even playing tennis in Hong Kong led to meeting really interesting people from all around the world. Even it turned into adventures in Japan, and they can continue to now. Taking my electric skateboard and riding to work in Japan has become, a recurring theme. Sometimes my children come with me. Being on the BMX bike and mountain bikes has also been a recurring theme. Sometimes these productive accidents hurt. Like I broke my collarbone a few years ago and it slowed me down, but maybe it wasn't such a bad thing because it gave me time to write the book, so I had to refocus on that, and it took a lot of energy to do that. The other thing that you probably, I'm sure you appreciate, is the value of stories. This was a kind of a revelation for me. I won't talk about it too much, but these are 5 of my uncles that went to World War II, all, presumed dead, shot down over Germany, but the war ended and somehow they all survived. Of the 5, only 2 of them wrote their story. So from my point of view, the other 3, it may not have, it's like they didn't exist because I don't know what really happened. So writing your stories and doing daily writing, I think, is really powerful. And it's something that I'd encourage you to do, because daily writing and capturing stories is what, gives you the raw material to repurpose in lots of different ways. I also discovered a group out of the US called StoryCorp. There's a great TED talk from them that is quite inspirational. Basically, they're encouraging children to interview their parents and grandparents and to create this time capsule. Definitely something I recommend. And go back and just Google the StoryCorp TEDx talk is one of the best I've seen. And then I just had little projects where I was trying to raise money. I was making cufflinks out of used bottle caps and sending any of the money back to Tanzania to fight poverty through education. And then I played with different technologies along the way. And then, building an authentic network has been a really core thing. So meeting people through LinkedIn, having these dinners when I was in New York or wherever we are, I try to host these dinners. I went to Creative Mornings in New York and I met the people that created that whole community. And then I spoke at at Creative Mornings back in 2020, and I realized, there's 200 people that spoke on the same topic. Wouldn't it be cool if I connected to each of them and learned what they spoke about? Because everyone had a different perspective on what invest meant. And then this has taken quite a while ago, my wife and I and our 4 children. And I think it was around the time of my parents, it was their 63rd wedding anniversary or something like that. So, it's good to have those, I guess, grounding sort of family situations that everyone values so much. When I spoke at Creative Mornings, these are the things that I spoke about. We have these resources that we can optimize, I guess, and depending on what we do with our time, our energy, and our resources, and how we invest those resources. And here is sort of the dividends you get if you use your time and your energy and your attention wisely. And then this is kind of like the phrase that I kind of extended. So putting yourself at risk of productive accident is the core idea. And then I've kind of just got to, understand that if you trust the process, then magic can happen. You kind of wait for the magic to happen, or you can make it happen intentionally. What I kind of worked out is that serendipity can be a predictable and repeatable process. when you have this mindset of putting yourself at risk of these productive accidents. And then I discovered that there's research that takes the same idea and applies it to careers. And if you search in Google for planned happenstance, it highlights that there's 5 key ingredients for developing an interesting career by following a very similar approach to productive accidents. So curiosity, persistence, flexibility, and my screen is hiding, optimism and risk-taking. So those 5 things definitely resonate with me, because, you know, you've got to be curious enough to join one of these, you know, Zoom calls. And then if you've got an idea, you've got to be persistent to make it work. And then you've got to be flexible to change path if some things aren't working, and just redirect your attention in a new way. Being optimistic that things are going to turn out, obviously, is something that I think we all share. And just risk-taking, but sort of sensible risk-taking, you know, something you're not going to put yourselves at risk or your families, but just small little experiments that it doesn't really matter if they fail. It's just a, you know, it's just a data point that you can continue to play with. That's my QR code. If you scan that QR code, that should go to my LinkedIn profile, I believe. So I can probably just leave it there. That's the book I ended up writing. It has a little bit of the blurb on the background. Really welcome. And yeah, let's stay in touch. And anytime, you know, if any idea gets, you know, we've planted some seeds here today, so let's see what can grow from some of these ideas.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Something interesting.
Yeah, really great to meet you all. I hope, you know, one day I hope you do write your stories down and share them, you know, even if it's just one page. You know, everyone should write at least one page about their story. And you know, I've gotten into the habit of, a friend encouraged me just to open up a Google document and write for 10 or 15 minutes every day. And that's already given me the inspiration to say, well, I wrote the original Productive Accidents, started kind of in Singapore, and we went to Hong Kong, and it's about what happened there. Then only, you know, 4 months ago, we moved from Hong Kong back to Singapore. So I could write the mirror image of that book, and, you know, what interesting things are happening here. And I could talk about the time that, you know, we gave a presentation to female entrepreneurs in the Ukraine. I can add that to the next book, and I will. I'll do that. So, and I'll take a picture of the screen here, and I'll put that in the book too. So there we go. I know you're not all on photos, but I'll take a picture of the screen here now anyway. So to be continued. Thank you guys. Thanks for having me.